Farm for Profit Podcast. Take a listen, have a blast. Farm for Profit Podcast. Learn about farming while having a laugh. Farm for Profit Podcast.
Corey, Dave, excited to bring back a repeat guest, and she's a repeat for a reason, but I almost had you, Corey, put together a Farm for Fun-like introduction for Elaine.
Yeah,
Because she definitely deserves the hype that comes along with those.
you
So
should have.
maybe I'll do my best here. But if listeners, is this the first episode you've grabbed of ours that has Elaine on as a guest, you need to go back and find the others. But Elaine Fraze is a certified professional speaker, coach, and author with more than 40 years of working with farm families and farm partners to help them discuss what I love her trademark of the undiscussable
Mm-hmm.
to make sure exactly she's got it. You got to go to YouTube and watch that. She's got her bowl to where she can put this together. Award-winning author, has written more than 5 books over the last 25 years to share her passion about simple, practical, and actionable tools that help farm families have tough conversations. So today we're focused on a couple of listener submissions that are going to revolve around the topic of communication and decision-making within the family farm and how we move that on to the next generation, what that looks like. Welcome back to the podcast, Elaine.
Delighted to be here with you three.
Yes. All right, Corey, does this ever happen on your farm to where you wish more of the decision-making power was in the next generation's hands?
Yes, I would say that. I don't know. I'm torn about it, right? Because I like having that older generation there for a support system, and I would hate to not have that. But then also feel like, with technology, farming's physical, but it's become less physical, and you can go until you're 90 years old, 100 years old, and really that it feels like that kind of moves everything backwards. When you hand the farm down to your 60-some-year-old kid. So, yeah, I could see that.
So, Dave, where this whole started, and we kind of gave Elaine a little bit of a heads up, we passed some of our listener suggestions on to her. The first one that started this whole episode planning was a listener that said, I've got an episode idea. I farm with my family. I farm with my grandpa, my dad, he's the major decision maker, and myself. My wife quit her job in January to help us on the farm as well. My dad has a hard time giving up control and has been struggling with that. Any help or resources that you have would be great. So, Elaine, that was pretty broad, but it sounds like they're ready to take on more, but maybe it's not that simple.
So the first question I have always as a coach, Tanner, is how old is Grandpa? And, Corey was talking about Grandpa being 90 or 100. But what if Grandpa is 80, Dad is 60, and son is 40? And in my world as a coach, when you're in your 40s, you need to have power and control over your destiny. I was trained at the Hudson Institute of Santa Barbara, California, 20 years ago. This June is my anniversary. And part of my map for that is the age and needs task of each stage. So I would love to know from your listener what the ages and stages are. And the next part of this question is, my dad has a hard time giving up control. Yes, many dads do, and moms, and grandfathers, and grandmothers. And so the question is why? And we'll dig into that a little bit. And then the next thing he says, I've been struggling with that. Any help or resources you would have would be great. And so what I would like to encourage all of the listeners is this is an unfolding. And one of the best things you can do on communication and interfamily communication, which is what we're focused on today in this episode, is to always come from curiosity. And so to say to Dad, I'm just curious, when are you going to be ready to let the decision-making be more collaborative? Because it seems to me that I have new ideas from college or from my peer network or from being on Farm for Profit podcasts, and I want to put some new things into place here, but it always seems like you get the final say. Can you tell me why, or when is that going to shift? Another good question is, Dad, it seems to me that you're aging and you're getting tired, and Mom's getting a little antsy to do something a little more different than just always be planting soybeans every year. So I'm just curious, why is this hard for you to let go, Dad? What are you afraid of? And I know a lot of your listeners would never ask their father, what are you afraid of? But a coach would. And
Yeah.
Corey, I always see you smirking because you always really challenge my questions.
Well, I get
The
it.
curiosity is what is Dad is afraid of in a lot of cases of you screwing up as the next generation. And you've already made a big commitment because your wife has quit her job. And I go, why did she do that without knowing what her role is going to be on the farm? Because was that a emotional threat, or was that a very financially well thought out decision for her to come back to get paid on the farm or not to get paid? And that's my other problem is people come back into the farm. And I think we're going to talk about compensation later today too. They come back without a clear contract or a clear understanding of who does what, by when, and for how much. So that fear of financial failure of the next generation is a thing.
I didn't think about that as it potentially being an emotional threat, trying to show Dad or mom that you're ready, and I'm ready because my wife just quit her job. Like, we're ready to take this over.
But did you discuss it, Tanner? That's the thing.
Right.
And if you just did it as another leveraging point, then it becomes another one of those what I call the undiscussables, or what we call a pinch point, because it wasn't well thought out, and she's kind of struggling too because she doesn't know what her role is.
Do you think they might have done that strategically, though? Some people in the background, want to force people's hands, and so if Dad's not easily communicable and doesn't talk very well, let's force his hand to talk. Hey, my wife just quit her job. She's joining the farm. Now we have to talk about it.
That's one approach, but not recommended.
But not recommended. It might. Yep.
Yeah. And to be fair to why people do the things they do, we're not inside their head. We haven't had the conversation with this listener, so we don't know all the context of this decision. But there may be health reasons. I'm working with a family right now where the mother has Parkinson's and the dad is just hanging on so tight, and he's just having a really hard time with the fact that there needs to be some transition. Another reason why dads don't like to let go of power and control is because they're afraid of losing wealth, they're afraid of losing their identity. Who am I if I can't call myself the main boss or the main manager anymore? And my husband, should write the chapter on this, because he's been very gracious at age 66 to answer the phone and said, hey, you want certified seed? Here's Ian's cell number. You need to call 534-0752, and he'll give some information, but he lets the main decision making for the seed business go now where it belongs, which is the next generation. Another fear is, besides losing their identity, is if I'm not the one signing the check, or if I'm not the one calling the shot on this machinery purchase or whatever the main decision is, will I still be respected? And will my opinion matter? Because I have a cousin who's 12 years older than my husband, that when he sold his farm, Dave, he gave up having an opinion, because once he was no longer the main guy, people didn't want his opinion anymore. And that was humiliating to him. And it's like what you said before, Corey, you don't want your father-in-law to be gone because you want their wisdom and experience. And as long as you have that culture and respect, then I think all of these other things will be in play. But communication is around staying respectful, even when the communication gets hard.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. The fear of losing your identity, because we think of our listeners as very adaptable. But to think about that, going from the decision maker to the teacher, I mean, they've always been a teacher to an extent, but kind of combining the two of what you and Corey have said is, how can we incentivize dad or mom to help them make that transition in their identity, their role? Is it simply just, let's put a job description together, or how do we go about that?
I think it's how you behave very much, Tanner, because culture is what you believe to be true, how you behave, and how you continue to make decisions together. So in our case, and it's there is a management book by Kaiser and Poots called Encouraging the Heart. And it's about how you manage business with non-monetary things. And one the top of the list is appreciation, respect, communication, asking powerful questions, sharing responsibility. So a good question for this listener is, if your dad is not doing well at letting go, start asking your dad, Dad, I'm just curious, what would you like to move towards? Because people will not let go of something. Like, I am not going to let go of moving out of this house that my husband's lived in since he was 6 years old. I'm not going to move to town and let go of everything unless I have something more exciting in town to move toward. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So even in changing transition in the communication in the family, Dad's not going to let go of what he's making decisions around unless there's something more invigorating and exciting for him to move towards. And unfortunately, Tanner, in a lot of farm families, Dad doesn't have hobbies. He doesn't have boards he wants to be on anymore. And so my question then becomes, Dad, what does an awesome day on the farm look like to you? Tell me where you are, what you're doing, who you're seeing, and when you come back in for supper at night, what are you telling Mom? What makes this a good day for you?
So what about the identity of the 40-year-old? So here I am 40 thinking I'm in a midlife crisis and I've changed careers once. And now what is my life moving forward? Let's take, I'm going to use Corey because he's sitting here. When Corey hits 40 and his dad's there, it's still Hillebo Farms, but is it his dad's Hillebo Farm or is it my last name farm? Is it, when does it become my deal? So although we're talking about the parents and the grandparents and what is their identity, I'm curious what the kids' identity is. They're still trying to figure out what they're supposed to be when they grow up.
Well, and they also want to know certainty, Dave, because they want to know, I have a wife, I have small children now, and I'm working my butt off. By the way, I am 40. I've kind of been working my butt off for the last 22 years since I've been 18. But when does it start to come my way? When do I get reward for all of the 100-hour weeks that I've put in? And this is the other thing, folks, that we need to pay attention to. How old are you? I'm working with a 71-year-old this week who's in a good financial position, has a blended family, but he doesn't pay attention to the fact that he's 71 and things have to transition, because exactly what you're speaking to, his son is approaching 40 and says, Elaine, I'm just a glorified employee. And why should I work my butt off to the success of my siblings who don't even live anywhere near this operation, but they're all shareholders? So again, it's questioning the why. Why are you making this decision? And that is called, in conflict resolution, intent, action, effect. So 40-year-old, what is your intent? A 40-year-old's intent is to become an owner sooner than later, and not just by death of a previous owner, grandpa or grandpa or grandma, or the father and mother, in this case of this listener.
Corey,
So
you're nodding your head to that. What you're in agreement, I guess.
Yeah, I'm in agreement. You want to become an owner. You want to be, have your chance to do what you wish with it, whether it's grow it or, try something different or, whatever you want.
I bet you want your dad to see you be successful. You don't want to wait till he dies to then be successful.
No, yeah, you don't want the whole like king and queen situation. You don't become king until the older one dies. So it's just struggles for me. I don't mind where I'm at 35. I have some ownership and that kind of stuff, but I also look at some of my peers who I was in my same class at college and all that kind of stuff. And man, they are in, big time roles, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year salaries, pushing almost to CEO. They're on the path to CEO, they're in the prime of their career. They're not coasting out, they get hit 45, then they coast out.
Yeah.
That's right when we're hoping to get the reins.
And you're comparing out of farming, and corporation, corporate world.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's, to compare, we've talked to our listeners a lot over the last 3.5 years about running their farm more like a business. Because even at the bank, there's a succession plan in place that I'm a part of. I might be 2 steps removed from that position of leadership or whatever it is, but there's a clear path and an expectation. And the reason it happens in the corporate world is they want to retain employees. If I don't know what my future looks like, I'm probably not going to stick around.
And I think we've used the phrase before, Tanner, being in the neutral zone. So just, put that stick shift on your old pickup back and forth in neutral. It's annoying to be in neutral. It's also a place of high stress and high anxiety, but it's not only the 40-year-old that's in neutral, it's mom. I'm 66. And so if I was the mom in this scenario of this listener, I'd go, hey, you promised me that after 45 crops, it would be my turn to get what I want. And here's a really awful question. When is it mom's turn to get what she wants?
Right.
And we might be fairly traditional in the roles we're talking about today, but let's also flip it. I have young women who are also 35 agronomists, very highly skilled, highly trained, and they're just annoyed because their father won't let go because she's female and doesn't think that she can run the farm, which is not true. And I think you and I have had this discussion before about how many farmers in Iowa are operated by female operators, right?
Last night at our FFA banquet, the entire board got voted in as all female.
Wow.
At my son's local FFA. So I got a question for you. So the listener question is, he has an episode idea that farming with your family, which we've kind of covered, and we've done a mock scenario with that. And the last time, so already on the podcast, we've talked of 4 different people's emotions and 4 different people's wants and needs. And so we got to communicate and respect each other's opinion. But dad wants what he wants. Mom wants what she wants. Kids want what they want. The wife, of course, of the 40-year-old wants what she wants and to see the future. How do we put this all into a plan, or what's your recommendation? Where does this listener go? He wants to have an episode on it, but here's the episode. Where does he go forward without just real quick?
So I would want him, first of all, to know very clearly what he wants and by when. So what are his timelines? And I often talk about clarity of expectations. So what does he expect? So for all 4 of them, different ages and stages, what do you all expect? And by when? And then are you all committed to making that happen? Because we know talk does not cook rice. We also know that procrastination is killing agriculture. Oh, we'll just do it after planting, after haying, after spraying, after harvest, after Thanksgiving, after Christmas, after Easter. Boom, we've done a whole year. And I think we've said that before too. Mm-hmm. So he wants a plan. The plan is this listener is going to be the driver. No matter how hard these conversations get, he's going to keep having them. And I would highly recommend, and this is not self-serving, this is just wise, that they get an outside facilitator who's not emotionally attached to the outcome and not emotionally enmeshed in all the emotional factors affecting planning on said farm. So that outside facilitator can guide them through hard conversations and read the room and see the body language and make notes on the flip chart. And at the end, they can all take pictures on their smartphone and they say, our next meeting is going to be this date. And then they start bringing in their other team of advisors. But there's no point in them creating a succession transition plan or a plan for the movement of management or ownership until every person is clear on what they want. And then when you get sitting in the room with the other people, you get to say, wow, I had no idea, Mom, Dad, I had no idea that this is what you want to do, because you never talk about it. And so it's pulling out all those gems of assumptions. And here we're talking about not making assumptions and putting it into a thinking process. So this young listener who wants a plan, is it simple as making a plan? You can make many plans, but your steps need to be directed with facilitators and professionals who can help you keep unfolding that plan.
So when and what? I got that. The one thing that I'm thinking, if I had to have a conversation with my dad right now, he would immediately bristle up and say, I'm not talking with some psychologist or something emotional. I don't do emotions. What does this listener say that he wants to have a conversation with an outside advisor?
Yeah, it can't come across as a threat either.
It can't come across as a threat that they're going to challenge his process. Because he's the ultimate say-all decision maker right now. What do we call that person? Is it just an advisor?
I call them a coach. I call them somebody who can help us navigate this journey. Because I've always used the expression, transition planning is like a journey. It's never done until you're dead. So who do you want to help you? And navigate's a nice term, because it's a movement.
Mhm.
It's not going to be straight as an arrow. It's going to have bumps in the road, which we all know. But this person who helps us navigate this transition, Dad, is not going to abandon us. And that person is going to help us keep our conversations safe and respectful. And they'll also be confidential, because that's the other thing they need to understand, Dave, is that what is shared personally. And if Dad thinks, well, you're taking me to a family therapist, no. Counseling is about recovery. Coaching is about discover. What we need on
Well,
our farm, Dad, is to discover the map and the plan going forward. I don't know, call yourself an outfitter. You're a succession
coaching.
outfitter,
The
right?
best in the world have coaches. I mean, the best football players.
Right,
We want to
yeah.
be the best, you know.
Exactly. And coach should be a non-threatening term. And we are very clear in our practice that we are not psychologists or family therapists, although I have been accused of being a marriage counselor because I'm a good listener. I've also been fired, Dave, because I made a dairy farmer very uncomfortable
Sure.
because I ask hard questions. And then the next person will say, oh, Elaine, I appreciate that so much because you actually put into words what everybody's thinking, feeling, needing, and wanting in this room. But then you speak it and then we can deal with it
Right.
because we're not guessing anymore.
So yeah, I keep thinking about, you can't come at this as a threat, but yet you still need to have a plan that, hey, Mom and Dad, by the time I'm 42, my kids are going to be X age. I want to be able to make some decisions, but it really can't come with an or else.
No, that's not helpful. That's
But-
emotional blackmail.
Right. But then you also, though, as the 40-year-old, need to potentially, if you're not getting what you want to become, you may have to explore your other options.
Absolutely.
How much when I was a firefighter for 20 years, one of the expressions we always said, if it wasn't written down, it didn't happen.
Right.
So meaning if you went on a call and that guy didn't break his leg, well, if you didn't write it in the report, it didn't happen. So we need to do that. How important is not just having conversation about it, but actionable tasks?
I just did a blog about that called The Importance of Target Dates and Timelines. And the very clear words, 2 little words, by when. Last week, we signed our wills. They hadn't been updated in 2 to 3 years. I just had my sister visiting and just got her reorganized, and her will was 5 years old. So the timeline is really important. The other thing is timelines help push against our tendency to procrastinate. We didn't just carry decide when we wanted to have this podcast today.
Mm-hmm.
Tanner set up a very specific time and place. We all show up. We all execute. The other thing is focusing and execute. So here's the other problem is that when I speak to large farm audiences and conferences and I ask them, why aren't you doing this? They always say, Elaine, we're too busy to plan, which means they haven't made it a big rock or a priority. And the other thing, we're anxious about the conflict we're going to stir up. And the other thing that they're stuck with is it's too overwhelming. And like this listener, what's the path? So there's where the map analogy says, let's go down this road first. The first road we want to go down is communication. If you can't come together yourselves to communicate clearly with each other, get a coach, get a facilitator, get someone who can help you. Now, in our family, our accountant, our tax specialist, he had that skill. And so when we were doing the transition plan with Wes's parents, he was the facilitator. In our plan now with our 35-year-old son, we have a coach. He comes and he sticks big Post-it notes on my kitchen wall, and we have meetings and we execute and then go on down our merry way for another 2 years until the next decision needs to be made that has major importance. So every family needs also a driver. So we have lots of people listening to Farming for Profit. And I want everybody listening today to say, yes, Elaine, I'm committed. No matter how hard this gets, I'm committed to being the driver of this process to make sure we keep moving down the road to success.
How hard is it for you as a coach to be coached?
Not at all. I have a business coach. I have an emotional wealth management coach, and I have peer coaching in my Professional Speakers Association. Want to walk the talk there, man.
Uh-huh. So I just kind of want to wrap up this portion and put it into perspective, because I feel like some of the easy way out is, if we're not specific, if our listener is not specific about what they want, and they say, I want to start making decisions on acres of crops. What happens, at least in the customer base that I serve and some of the listeners that I've seen, is dad gives them the right to rent a 40 or an 80.
Yes.
And turns that over to them to start making decisions. And if y'all aren't watching on YouTube, you would have seen my air quotes.
Mhm.
Because we all know that they're still buying the same seed hybrids that dad does, because it goes into dad's bulk discount. They're still buying from dad's, and I'm generalizing anyway, from the next generation's fertilizer company, from the same prescription, because they don't want to wash the tank out of the sprayer.
Yeah, you're
There's-
not going to go
there's-
buy a different tillage piece of equipment or
The only
tractor. Yeah.
decision that's really changing in that scenario is when the bushels get sold.
Mhm.
Probably not where they get sold to.
Marketing decisions. Yeah.
It's probably when and how much the bushel gets sold for. So be very clear, listener, that you don't just get pushed an 80, because
Right.
it's really not accomplishing your goals. You got to be specific.
You
with
could push
that.
me an 80. I'll take it.
How important is this though? Like, I think of any good team that there was a mentor and then there was a receiver on that. Okay, and communication is two-way. Like, I've seen Corey and his dad go to the seed dealership together to some of the seed meetings at Farm Progress Show. So if the kid's not doing that already, if I'm the dad, I'm saying, hey, they're not involved in it. Like,
Right.
if like, there's got to be a level of, even employee, if you want to get the job, you said there's a plan for you ahead at the bank, but people have to see you wanting to go towards that goal too.
Yeah.
So
With
I wonder if there's something we could advise this listener that they need to be doing. If they're saying that their dad doesn't listen, and that he's going to be the person that's not giving up control, he might not think anybody's ready for control yet, because maybe
Exactly.
you haven't laid it out there yet.
And what you're speaking to, Dave, is passion and commitment. I've had that exact conversation. So I have a little tool here that's a gift from Dr. John Baker from the University of Iowa Beginning Farm Club. And listeners can just reach out to me at farmfamilycoach.com and just say, Elaine, send me the ultimate decision maker. But when you're talking about specifics, Tanner, planning day-to-day work, making crop plans, deciding mix and type of enterprise, inputs, operations, when to pay bills, when to hire more help, recruit and select employees, supervise employees, decide and plan capital projects. There's a whole list here, but what this sheet does is dad checks off if he's the main decision maker, successor checks off if they're the main decision maker, and if they make them together, they check off under number 3, where it's shared between the operator and the successor. I did this with a farmer who said exactly that. Elaine, I'm not sure if my son is really that committed. I said, have you had the conversation? He said, no. I said, well, let's start with this.
Mhm.
So again, what decisions do you want to be making besides rolling over 40 or 80 acres to have your own little enterprise? And secondly, the passion and commitment. A very helpful communication tool is on a scale of 1 to 10, Corey, with 10 being extremely passionate to own something by the time you're 42. What's your number?
What's my number?
Yeah, between 1 and 10. How passionate are you to be an owner of something by the time you're 42?
I'd say 10.
Exactly. And why didn't you say 11?
Yeah,
Right?
well,
Like, why-
because you
or
didn't
why-
really go there.
Because I didn't offer it to you. But
Yeah.
but if I said this to a farmer the other day, on a scale of 1 to 10, how excited are you working with me? And they said 5, and I said, oh, why didn't you pick a lower number? Because then they have to justify why they're at that on the fence position. And it's based on the work of Michael Pantalon, who wrote an amazing book called Instant Influence. Because when you use numbers are very good for people with linear thinking. And you can say on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being I am ready, how ready are you, Dad, to let me do some pre-quotes on the fertilizer? Or how ready are you to let me have an enterprise that's my own under the umbrella of this bigger farm? There's many ways of getting independence of decision making.
I like that.
Yeah.
And I know we've had that used on us in the past. It's very clear how you get to an answer there. I mean, the last piece before we move on to the question you hinted at in the intro about pay on a family operation is I want our listeners to use the banker as an excuse.
Yes.
Because there's time to where you will have to switch over the ownership of the farm. And if you're not giving decision making ability to the next generation, they don't have any credit history. They don't have any experience that allows me to generate an approval. So they may be mid 40s, late 40s into their 50s and have to use creative financing opportunities or borrow from you next generation. And if that's something your grandpa and dads and moms are all fine with, great. But if the goal is to be independently operating, only having a 40 to kind of make decisions on, but really you just sold the grain that came from the 40 doesn't float with the banker. So you can use the banker as an excuse to not threaten, but provide additional value as to why transitioning more of the decision making to the next generation makes sense. But let's parlay this into the next listener's question. So completely different email. Said, I'm a 7th generation farmer in Virginia. We run a commercial cow-calf and custom feeding operation. My question is, do you all have an episode about family farm salaries? And we don't. That's why we're talking about it today. It's a hard topic to discuss. I was just curious of y'all's input. And this is going to be tricky, Elaine. And Corey's nodding his head. Dave's nodding his head because it's hard to manage salaries of non-family people when you're trying to justify worth and value and equate that to a pay as well as perks and benefits. But now if I'm working with my brother, my cousin, my mom, my dad, where do we start?
We Google it. It's $42,089 is the average income in Iowa at $20.23 per hour.
Okay, so that's a start.
You can go flip burgers for that now.
Well, you could.
Actually, I just saw, not to derail the conversation, Elaine, for you, but I just saw that Panda Express, if you want to be a manager of the Chinese fast food restaurant, will pay $69,000 a year. And the reason I saw this post is a professor at Iowa State was saying that that's more than the salary that he gets with a doctorate to teach the next generation of people. So
think of all the crab rangoons.
just exactly all the free food. It's a win. All right, Elaine.
I'm guessing you, Corey, once you graduated college, you probably think, well, the other people in my age demographic are making this.
Oh, that's why I mentioned it.
Hey, Dad,
earlier,
I see my friends that are the same age making $150,000 a year. I think my wage needs to go up. Is
that's tough because kind of the finances of the farm, and if you have several employees making $150,000 or one, that's about the fastest way to take that farm down all the way,
and not leaving room for reinvestment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Elaine, you wrote a blog or a newsletter that talked about, first of all, before we even get to salary, how you hire family back onto a farm and how that fits. Talk about what you wrote.
Well, just the whole concept about where is it written that just because you share the DNA of your parents that you deserve or get a job on the farm. And this comes in my world to be cumbersome and hard when everybody, because they're a child of that family, thinks that there's a position or a right for them to be involved in that farm, and there may not be room. So I'm a home economist by degree. I have very, I think, healthy attitudes around money. And I want to talk about a fair exchange of value and what the skill set is of anybody on your farm, whether they're employees who are related, part of your family, or employees who are not. So first of all, what is the skill set that your farm needs? And I lean pretty heavily in this department of talking about compensation on Dick Whitman's wonderful digital management toolbox, because I give this out like candy. They're his compensation worksheets that talk about farm perks. And so the farm perks can be anywhere from 14 to 20,000 of what the farm corp or the farm business is paying for on behalf of the family. But as a home economist, I want to back it up to one step. Everybody needs to have groceries, eat, have decent clothes, and have a decent place to live, and their basic needs met. And for each person, that family living expense is going to be different. And there's a great farm credit webinar called Two Economists and a Lender, which I also would send listeners to, where they talk about the research from Illinois and Minnesota and South Dakota on what does it cost to live. And I don't know if you three gentlemen are keeping track, but I spend $75,000 a year on living, and that doesn't include my charity or my investments. You also mentioned, Corey, $150,000 per person income cannot be cash flowable on many farms. And so then it's the point about financial transparency and what can the farm afford for cash flow now. But what my son has done and what my husband is doing is they're delaying compensation because they work as in a joint venture, and they might take 60 grand a year for family living, but their energy and input is going towards ownership because they're both owners in a joint venture. The other problem here is you need to start separating as the founder your expectation on where your next chapter income is going to be, which I call the income stream. So if everybody listening would just put a line down their paper, I think we've done this before too, farm assets on the left-hand side, personal wealth on the right-hand side. And if that personal wealth bubble on your Iowa farm is very low, you're in a pickle because you're expecting all your income when you're 70, when you're 80, when you're 90 to come from your Iowa farm, which is draining cash flow from the farm rather than reinvesting it back into the farm and paying the farm employees, right? Now, here's the other context that we haven't even talked about. What's fair compensation for my son when he's the only successor? Fair compensation for him is knowing that he is going to be the owner of millions of dollars of land, Tanner, when he buries his mother and father. Because the other successor, who is my daughter, is not getting the farmland. And that's written down in a legal document. That's a for sure thing. So do you see where we're going here with compensation? Compensation, first of all, needs to be for living, fair price for family living. Compensation also needs to recognize skill. We had a Red Seal mechanic here who saved us over $50,000 to $60,000 a year because he could fabricate things and do amazing things that we didn't have to outsource it. He's no longer with us, and so now we're starting to pay, the John Deere guy to show up or the Case IH guy to show up because we're not having the same service level, right? So when we talk about compensation, again, we're talking about expectations, skill set, and also what is best for the business. And when we talk about sweat equity, that's delayed compensation. So my son is going to get a lot of delayed compensation when I die, but he's not suffering in the meantime.
So
nor should he.
Our listener question is asking about farm family salaries.
Right.
So what I'm hearing is, first, we might need to have a discussion with our line down the middle of the paper. How much is, I'm going to say the top person in the food chain, the current decision maker, how much are they making might be step one for this listener. And once they figure out left side, right side, how much wealth does dad have to take on his own? Or is he expecting it'll give perspective for the younger people or the employees in this case that are getting the salary, how much dad can afford at the time, kind of what you were alluding to. Hey, here's the whole budget, but we've got to be transparent for that.
Right.
And then after that, the farm family salaries, if we're talking that, if that decision makers help them make this decision, I wrote down fair exchange of value. Because I think I heard it 3 times, fair exchange of value. And I don't, we can think we're worth whatever we're worth, but it's to that decision maker on the top. What are you worth?
Right. And it comes back to the reason we put this episode together is it's communication within your family, because Corey and I both know of an area operation in which the older generation has said, I wasn't given anything to start with. I don't plan to leave much of anything. Like, I will live off of what's here. And kids, if there's anything left over, that should just be a bonus.
Yeah.
So it puts a lot of perspective as to if you're expecting compensation from that family member, it's not going to be significant, especially in the realm of future wealth.
I'd be curious to see how many Iowa farmers, if they put that line down the middle and said, here's farm operation assets and here's our personal assets, how balanced that would be, because I think it would tip outrageously towards the farm assets.
Well,
And
it's
that's why we have so many hard conversations, Dave, because I'm a home economist by degree. So my biggest concern is quality of life first for the family. And you've all heard the term, if somebody's not happy, nobody's happy. I don't think it's just the women. It's the men and the women. And I've had women in tears saying, Elaine, when I go through that grocery checkout, I'm never sure if I have enough money to pay for diapers. I say, why have you not had this conversation about your husband and your compensation on this operation? The other thing that this Virginia farmer, he's in a commercial cow-calf operation. His margins are very tight. The other thing is it's livestock, so it's 24/7, 365. It's hard work. Not a lot of people are embracing that anymore in terms of livestock operations. The other problem is I have a livestock operation I'm coaching where one son has a wife and 4 children, 2 with very special needs right now, and a brother who doesn't have anybody in his life, and they are being paid exactly the same. And the brother who's the family is the one who has more managerial tasks. That is not a good scenario. Where is it written that just because you share the same mother that you get the same salary? And again, I have another tool from Jim Solden, a very old one called Performance Review, that talks about quality of work, work relationships, and general habits and skills. And Dick Whitman has another thing, it's called 6.2 job description list that's 7 pages long, which I'm also happy to share with anybody who asks for it. But what's your job description? And does your compensation match what you're doing?
That's tricky, because I lean into the corporate world, being an employee, HR and confidentiality. I don't know. I have an indication, but I don't know what my coworkers make. Corey, do you know what your brother makes?
roughly, yeah.
Does your brother know what you make?
Roughly, yeah.
So there's a level of transparency in the family farm that probably makes it function.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know that we've got other listeners that are battling a generational switch now, not because it was planned, but because of death.
Mm-hmm.
And a brother-in-law is not carrying the weight. Of course, we've only heard one side because they don't both email us. Is not carrying the same weight, but yet gets to split half the proceeds.
This is tough for me because you just made a comment and I've been reeling on it ever since, and I don't know that I heard it right. You said that one brother has a couple of kids and the other brother doesn't. This is my scenario. So because my sister decided to have 4 kids and I decided not to go out and have 4 kids right away, that she should be compensated more because she's got more family to take care of than I do. As a family making family decisions, maybe, but as an entrepreneur, like trying to be the most successful that I can and plan my steps in life, I'm like, well, wait a minute. No. This is BS. She doesn't get more because she's got 5 kids. That feels like welfare.
No, that's not the point. And thanks for clarification, because being clear is kind. The point is that the farming brother with the children, Dave, is the one who's the manager. He's the one who has a higher skill set. So irregardless of the fact that he has 2 children that have special needs and irregardless of that, the tipping point here, or the common pinch point, is the fact that his skill set, and also what Tanner just mentioned about the other brother-in-law, you have inequity of amount of time spent working. And so there's different apps on your phone. One of them, I worked with some cranberry farmers out near Vancouver, BC, and they had 5 kids all working together, male and female, on this cranberry patch bog. And they were having real problems with fair compensation. I said, where is your punch card? And they go, oh yeah, Elaine. So they started using Exact Time. There's all kinds of apps you can use in your phone. They actually started tracking. And we hear this often in business, right? You cannot change what you cannot measure. So you start measuring said brother who's working 100-hour weeks, single brother who's working 45, 50. They're both drawing the same income.
I see.
That's not fair. But what you said about just the fact that I have children means I should be paying more. No, that's not necessarily an increase. But what might come into the farm compensation model is, do they get other benefits that are non-taxable? For instance, does everybody on this farm get fuel in their truck? On many farms it is. But I also know farms where the kids come home from the city on weekends and go straight to the gas tank. That's not good. They didn't earn that. But is the father willing to gift it? Yes. But is that clean accounting? No. Yeah. And the other thing I have happening that's not fair with other siblings that are in parallel businesses with their siblings, they have different operations, but they farm in the same proximity to the same mother. One of them is getting to use all of the mother's assets. The other one is not. That's not fair compensation because, again, there's not clean accounting. So this person thinks that they're have this rock and roll business, and I'm going, your business doesn't look profitable to me. You're working off your mother's assets and you're not paying for them. So I don't think that's fair compensation either. Do you see where this conversation goes?
Mhm.
So
Different layers of compensation for food and expenses and the basic living. And listeners can go to fcc.ca, which is farmcreditcanada.ca, and they have a it's called the cost of living calculator. Good place to start. Do you have a hot clue what you need to keep your family in basic needs and good, which
Best
is around
segment,
70?
hot clue.
yeah, and I liked it where you went, Elaine, because you have to be able to be flexible when you compare what you are worth versus hiring labor out of the open market. You're going to have skills and experience that's going to warrant a paycheck to accompany the skills that you have, but you also have clarity and hopefully transparency on what the farm can afford.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go on top of that and you might have clarity as to what other employees or other family members are getting paid themselves. So it's a tricky realm to go into, but I also know that money is the root of quite a bit of conflict.
Yes,
in
and so that's where I'm a big proponent of having those conversations. And my friend Bruce Sellery has a podcast called Moo La La, and the book he wrote is Moo La La: Why Smart People Do Dumb Things with Their Money. And his first question is, what does money mean to you? And money for me is a form of energy to pay a debt, to grow a business, and to be generous. But I'm in a much different stage of financial freedom than my 35-year-old son is, who has land mortgages and a new house to pay for and 3 kids to, put in hockey and violin and dance and soccer and all those other good things. And then what money means, and this goes back to our discussion earlier in this podcast about power and control. Money also means security to a lot of older farmers. And so I know of farmers that have $500,000 sitting, Tanner, not growing, just sitting in a bank account somewhere because it makes them feel good about sleeping at night, because they came from a time like my father did in a time of scarcity and not abundance. And then you have the farmers my age who were buying land in the 1980s with those outrageous interest rates, and your 35-year-olds weren't even born then, or they were just born in the late 80s. So all of these, so what is another helpful communication tip is to have a conversation about, what does money mean to you and how much is enough?
Can you ever
Right?
have enough?
Yes. And my husband would say, well, just a little more than the neighbors.
More than the neighbors.
That is a joke. You guys did the right thing. You laughed.
Nope, we're not all rich farmers like Corey.
Yeah.
$500,000 wouldn't even buy a dang tractor.
Well, wouldn't even get the DEF taken off of it, right?
Yeah, couldn't even buy an 80.
That's true.
Used to be able to.
Right. And you see that, and see, guys, that's the other thing. That was then, this is now. When I was a young married farm partner, we were buying $67,000 quarters. Those same quarters now are worth $500,000. And we've had this discussion before about what the value of land. And there's the other thing. Where is it written that you have to buy my land? Because we are rolling over our land to our son, because we're not going to make the next generation buy the same land over and over and over again. But the reason we can do that is because we've also paid attention to the personal wealth side, right? And that's wise. And that's because we've used financial advisors and investment planners to do that. And I am still 66 and working full time. So let's not compare apples and oranges, because there's also conflict. I think, Tanner, the conflict around money is, are you deserving of what you're being compensated for? And then we have people, I had a woman, it's a very telling story. Your listeners will enjoy it. She's a young woman. She comes up to me. She said, Elaine, when we got married, I put all our wedding money and my salary into buying a tractor. My sister-in-law got married the same time we did. She put all her money into buying a new couch and redecorating their farm home. What do you think we're having problems with now?
Right.
They're having problems with how the wealth accumulated and the time, opportunity, cost of money worked, because one of them put money into things that made money and the other one watched too many Pinterest stories and Instagram accounts. Right? And comparison is a joy stealer. So for this young fellow in Virginia, the guidelines are deciding, and family bloodline, like, I haven't been to speak in Virginia, but I was in Pennsylvania and working with 10 Generation Farms there at their vegetable conference. And there's this thing in agriculture that's killing us, which is also the culture of heritage and the expectancy that it was done this way before and I will die. Don't you dare sell this land. Don't you dare make changes, because it always has to be this way. This is the way we've done it for generations. And you might be the generation that says, you know what? I'm not signing up for this anymore. I have to let this go. I'm sorry to disappoint you, great grandfather, but you in your generation have to do what's best for you and your family. And sometimes that may not be what great grandfather did. And that's a grieving process, because that's losing the expectation of all that legacy and heritage that you are carrying on your shoulders.
You know, it's hard to, I'm thinking as a business owner, I want to hire people to help out. Well, what do we pay them? Well, I think to myself, well, I wouldn't do that job for $20. But then think of the value. So what is fair compensation for the value of what they're doing? It might be changing toilet paper, for crying out loud, the value of what they're doing versus making the decision to, et cetera. But I struggle with that because I always ask myself, well, what would I want to get paid on that? Well, I wouldn't get out of bed for this much, but
at a time you would have.
Yep.
Yeah. We all grow through where the perception of value is. But Elaine, you did a good job of segueing us into the next email that we've got from our listener. And when you talked about how your family is not expecting your son to buy the land from you.
Yeah.
Right. And we talked about your 10 generation family out there on the coast that feels the burden of having to continue on the legacy of their family's farm. This listener says, what are some different creative ways in which future and upcoming generations in the family have bought out their dad or grandpa or whoever it is from an existing operation? So let's take our kind of closing minutes of this episode and talk a little bit about some examples. We don't have to go all the way in depth as to how they put the plan together, but what are some ways?
So one of them is Lydia Carpenter, who's one of my coaching team, who's first generation farmer, started from scratch over 10 years ago with her partner. And they went into a joint venture with a non-family person who was gracious to them. So they scrimped and saved and got the down payment for their first quarter. They're in direct farm marketing, and they make a very profitable living by marketing pigs, chickens, and beef from their quarter section and from renting and having a joint venture with a non-family member. So that is, don't discount benevolent people who want to see young people survive and do well. Another creative one is, in our case, our son has bought something but not land. He bought the seed business. So he has a 20-year agreement with his father, who he bought the business from, for the profits from that business to go off to paying payouts to the dad for the seed business. So what can you buy out? Maybe you can start out by buying out all the haying equipment, and then you have your own custom haying business, right? Under the umbrella of that business. Another one is being very clear about your off-farm income stream. And guys, This may come as a surprise to you, but I coached a family once where the young woman, her income from multi-level network marketing in a cosmetic business was $1 million a year. Yikes.
Wow.
And you can't, yeah, wouldn't you love to be married to her? And so, but the problem in that family was that the son, because his wife had such a great income, he was paid nothing. That wasn't wise. And I said exactly, Tanner, for what you said. You're not getting a credit rating. You're not establishing your integrity as a borrower. You like, and plus, that's not real life, right? To be paid nothing, although it is, which I think is unfortunate. Another one is capping the amount, Tanner. So Glenn Dodgstrom, who's also on my team, who's a retired CPA, he met with a young Alberta farmer who we worked with over 14 hours. He did work with this young man, and they cash flowed and projected the exact amount that he could afford to pay out his dad, and the amount was $2 million. Okay. So it wasn't a pie in the sky number. Oh, two sounds like a good number, but 2.5 sounds better. They actually looked at what the assets were, what the production value was, what the projections are. Some of the land was irrigated, some of it wasn't. And he said, Dad, I've done the numbers. The best I can offer you for a buyout is $2 million. All right. So those are some of the creative way. And then the last one I want to give you is a nanny. They hired a nanny. Why would you hire a nanny? Because where is it written that farmers can't have nannies, for one? And in this case, it was the woman who was the agronomist, who was the main operator. Her husband was a carpenter. He did something different. And I have a new book to share with you guys called Buy Back Your Time, Dan Martell. And he has a formula in here where taking your profits and dividing it by 2008, and he's got this little formula as to what price you should be buying back your time. And according in my world, I should be buying back any job that's worth $18 an hour or less, because my time is worth better being spent in other areas. And that whole idea of outsourcing is, oh, I can do it myself. Well, yes, but time is money as well, right?
Absolutely.
And time with your family. Okay, like, guys, Corey, with your family, like with your little kids,
Yep.
how can you buy back time?
Right. You can't. You gotta make it. Or divvy out smaller jobs.
And then the other piece, Tanner, for creative objective buyouts is what we talked about. We talk about sweat equity. And I have an article that was written years ago by my friends Andrew DeRook and Mark Sloan, who used to work with the FCC, who are now mediators and farmers. But they had all these different scenarios that you can have written contracts. Yes, you're coming back from college, but I'm only going to pay you $50,000 a year. But in lieu of that $30,000 gap, I'm going to account for that in the next 5 years and exchange a piece of land of that value for what was delayed or not compensated to you fairly when you first came back. Now, the smart people write that down and have it signed and notarized, because then it's an employee contract. It's like having an incentive program for your farm kid. That's not just a conversation. It's an actual document. But if you mention the word sweat equity to the non-farm siblings, they get mad because they say, oh, he gets so many perks already. How come he gets more? And then I said, well, would you like the $5 million debt that your brother is carrying?
Mm-hmm.
And then the room goes silent a little bit.
I wonder how many people do contract for deed, because I even, part of your wage this year, technically the dad's being the bank, you can buy that tractor. You can buy that planter next year. You can buy the farm contract for deed over this period of time amortized. How many farming families structure it where the dad is the bank?
So to give you a little bit of insight from my side, Elaine, I was going to bring that up exactly. And it's tricky on the equipment side because equipment lifespan is a lot less.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are going to buy the equipment, for example, had a family that was buying the entire set of equipment from his in-laws over a 12-year time period, and it was set out in a contract very specifically. It was X dollars a year, and each year you took full ownership of another piece.
Mm-hmm.
Because that gave them clarity that once they took full ownership of all the gravity wagons, they could now trade those in as their own on a grain semi and hopper. Otherwise, if you wanted to trade the planter, that wasn't until year 8. you had to get permission from the selling generation
Mm-hmm.
to make that decision, and then you'd probably have to adjust your buyout plan. You had to be very clear in expectation because of how quickly equipment depreciates its value and its actual useful needs. The difference between contract for deed in land and dad being the bank is on the accounting side, because you could transfer the deed today and sign a mortgage with your parents, and they get to claim some of that income as interest income at their normal taxable rate. Rather, if you contract for deed, that actual ownership of that farm doesn't transfer until the contract is fully satisfied in year 40, whichever it is. So those are unique ways to continue to look about it, but there's different tax implications in the U.S.
I was just going to say, when I think of working with families that somebody's going to buy them out, the kids are going to buy out because they want to sell the farm. Tax implications are the largest conversation I have with anybody of when is the right time to buy out. How do we structure that buyout? What about entity structure, percentage wise, or do we buy sister out? It's really tax implications is huge.
Because I had a family or a friend of mine growing up that at a young age out of college gave up a majority of the farming decisions to him. Still there as a 100% advisor, willing to contribute, make marketing decisions, but ultimately all the crop farming was in his name. The rent was paid to the family members, and that's the income that mom and dad lived off of, was the rent that came from the farming operation. Farming operation was 100% the next generation. He's now got 20 years of experience in the industry, 20 years of wealth generation. Mom and dad have been living off of the rent that comes from the farming entity, and they're still able to financially buy more farm ground based upon that cash flow. So in their situation, the land has not transferred generations, but the decision making did almost instantaneously. Dad still gets to do everything he wants to do and is involved.
And look at the trust and respect there, Tanner. My husband got the keys to the farm the day he came home from ag college with his plant science degree, because his father was a preacher, wanted to be a preacher, didn't want to be a farmer. So by the time he's put in, this will be his 44th crop. And he's more than happy to have that mentor role and that compassionate mentor role to our son and the employees in the team.
Elaine, do you see anybody, I'm thinking of buying my kid a car, but I'm going to take it farther than that. Sometimes when you go to college, the business that you hey, you get a job as a nurse, but we'll pay for your full nursing degree, but you got to work here 4 years. Is there anything like that in farming? I will send you for ag business and pay the entire way during college, but you owe me 5 years of working for no money. Is there any kind of swap like that for paying for college?
I think that has been done. I have a friend, Don McCannell, who's succeeded his financial planning business now to his children, his daughter and his son in Saskatoon. And years ago, he said, Elaine, when a farm family purchases a marketable education of one of their children, that's like giving them a gift of $200,000.
Yeah.
So he put a value on it, and that was years ago. And now, of course, with the price of university or college or gas or vehicles or living and all that stuff, the price you might want to put on that. But again, you would have a discussion about, I see this as a fair exchange of value of, say, $250,000. And if the salary coming back is going to be $50,000, then that's 5 years. But at no salary, I think no salary is harmful because it doesn't feel right. It feels like someone has been taken advantage of. And if you Google Lance Woodbury sacrifice article, Lance wrote a wonderful piece around what sacrifice is good sacrifice and what is not. And I have met families, much like I think a grandfather you alluded to, who felt like the next generation needs to suffer just like we have. And I'm going, no. Why should my son suffer? Because when he walked back to the farm after his ag diploma, he got a beautiful farm to keep building. Whereas my husband got a farm that had gone to rack and ruin with an employee who had taken over for his parents for 5 years. So everybody has a story. And what I want people to be is to be clear, to be kind, to be able to express what they expect, and not to be fearful of what's coming from the other person's mouth, because what I want to see families doing is seek understanding. Do you understand why dad is hanging on so tight? Do you understand why daughter-in-law came back and now she's wondering what her role is because they haven't had a clear conversation because she's afraid to ask? She hasn't been seen and heard yet.
Can I be a listener and come up with a brand new question?
You can. But I was getting ready to wrap.
I have a whole brand new question here and a whole book for you to write.
Oh, another one. Okay.
I want you to write a book on how to get into farming when my family is not involved.
Okay.
So we have talked about how to make money with your family. We've talked about having the hard conversations and what compensation looks like. We've talked about what it looks like to inherit that farm or buy them out. What if you're just a person, and I get a bunch of them that go to school, I want a farm, but there is no way I can get into this because my family's not into it. Is there anything out there to have a conversation with? You know what? I'm going to go buy out the Hillebo farm. I would like to go work with them, and I want to.
I wouldn't do that.
Set up to inherit the Hillebo farm, or like, is there anything out there to do that? I bet you half of our listeners are in this ballpark.
No, and so they can just reach out to me. It's called Not Related. They just Google Not Related. It's in countryguide.ca. It's an article written years ago where this young teenage boy was exactly in that position. He walked across the way down the road and he started working for a neighbor farmer, and the neighbor farmer literally adopted him as if he was his own son. And I say this all the time to bachelor farmers who don't have successors. And I say, guys, put an ad out there, wear a t-shirt. I was sitting in speaking in Bigger, Saskatchewan, and I had a show of hands. 33% of my audience, Dave, did not have a successor. And I said, guys, you should all be wearing t-shirts so we know we can come and talk to you about, can we go into business with you? And if anyone wants to have a conversation with Lydia Carpenter, they just have to go to farmfamilycoach.com and say, I want to talk to Lydia, and she'll do a discovery call with your listeners about how she, in the last 10 years, has been a farmer straight out of the city of Winnipeg. And her husband's from South Africa. They started with nothing.
I like that idea, Dave.
There's the t-shirt idea.
I was just going to say.
Yeah. Bachelor farmers say, I'm open for business. It goes for more than
But wouldn't that be fun?
Yeah, the conversation is great.
Because he's my neighbor. He's 75 years old. He's still calving. His Red Angus are much nicer calvers apparently than his Charolais are. And we contract him to grow barley for us. I was just in his yard the other day, and I'll call him Charlie. That's not his real name, but I worry about him all the time. And I found out he does have a will, so I'm thankful for that. But I know another young couple who's desperately wanting to start a farm, and I'm trying to put them together. There's also a website called successionmatching.com with Allison Anderson in Canada. And this is for all kinds of small to medium-sized businesses in Canada, and I think some in the US. But it's the whole idea of putting people together who are compatible, who want to do business together. And where is it written that you have to be family? It's not.
I like this. Well, for the sake of time, I'm going to summarize. Elaine, we always know we could talk forever, and we appreciate that. It gives us another excuse to bring you back again.
Yeah, I enjoy that. Thanks.
Your wisdom is unmatched, and we are glad that we get to share that with our listeners. The question we're changing up with you now is, knowing what you know now, our young listeners, what would you tell yourself back at age 18, or somebody who's 18 now getting ready to launch into this wonderful world of agriculture? And I've got so many notes while she's thinking about her answer here. I'm going to hit my favorites. Intent, action, effect. Know and be very clear what your intent is, so that way you can begin to take action, and that will create the effect of your actions towards the direction of this. Use the scale of 1 to 10. If you are looking for clarity or to drive clarity in an answer, ask for it on a scale of 1 to 10, but then question why not higher or why not lower to dive deeper into that. When you're looking at trying to get clarity, it's best to approach it out of curiosity. Yes. Don't approach it out of greed. Seek that clarity by just being curious, and understand that if we're talking a switch of control from a generation down to a younger generation, there's fear involved. It could be fear of losing wealth, fear of losing identity, fear of losing respect, losing control. That fear can be at least conditioned by generating clarity as to what your intent for the farm is, to use your skills and move things forward as well. Of course, look for things that are going to be more invigorating and exciting for them, because you'll have to fill a gap. Once they give something up, they're going to need to fill that with something else. Somebody has to be a driver for this conversation. Remember that if you're in neutral, that usually creates high stress and high anxiety. So let's get something put in gear. If you're talking about fairness and compensation and trying to figure that out, figure out what your family living costs are, look at a performance review process to make sure everybody's being compensated for what they're doing, use a clock in, clock out program to be able to monitor time involved. You can't change what you can't measure. So it's important to be able to take a look at that. If you're interested, Elaine shared a bunch of books with us. She told us about the Moolah Law podcast to be able to talk about relationships with money, because what does money mean to you? Pay attention to what your time is worth, because you can't buy back your time as you're looking at making sure the farm is profitable. When we look at how we can creatively transfer wealth and the farm into the next generation, we've talked about a salary plus bonus compensation. We've talked about getting a nanny to be able to provide more time to devote to the business. Look at non-family partners, contract buying, or family members playing the role of the bank, using non-farm income to support this, capping the amount or providing an evaluation based upon cash flow as an option to use, and kind of a reverse calculation. So we will get ready to wrap up this episode here with your Elaine, with your answer, and we'll be ready for our next.
So I say be aware of your strengths. You can use Strength Finders 2.0, know what you're good at and what you should be valued for. Hire a business coach and have financial transparency, and build a team of advisors through astute use of family meetings. Don't assume what other people are thinking, feeling, needing, and wanting. So that was who I would encourage people to start off, even when they're 18.
I love this. She already talked about the advisory team.
I think you both missed it. You missed one thing she said that was very important, and she missed one thing she would have told her 18-year-old self. You don't have a hot clue what's going on.
No.
All right,
That is
there's another T-shirt. So Dave, you're going to make you're going to make T-shirts. You and Casey or Corey are going to make T-shirts, and I'll make books. That's the deal.
There you
Sounds
go.
good. I'd
Awesome.
also challenge everyone, go to Farm Family Coach on Instagram and hit up her link tree
Yes.
to get all the information you need.
That's good. Elaine, we appreciate it so much. Thank you for hanging out with us.
Yeah, and let me know when the planting's done. We're just getting started. Thanks, guys. Great to be
Yeah.
with you today.
Thank
Thanks,
you so
Elaine.
much. And listeners, until next time, have a good one.